Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On September 5th, 2025, just after midnight in Utah, the state plans to execute 67-year-old Ralph Leroy Menzies by firing squad. That method is rare in modern America. Menzies chose it many years ago, and Utah has used it only a few times since the 1970s. Unless a court steps in, the warrant sets both the date and the method. Ralph Menzies was born in Utah in 1958. Court records and news reports describe a rough childhood, unstable, sometimes abusive. That background may explain parts of his path, but it doesn't excuse what came later, and it doesn't bring back the person who was lost. Late 1970s, Menzies had already been convicted of aggravated robbery, escaped from prison, and was linked to the shotgun robbery and shooting of a taxi driver while on the run. Those crimes led to long prison terms. He was paroled in October 1984. Within a year, he was arrested again for theft, pled guilty to attempted theft on February 10, 1986, and was out on bail by February 20. 3 days later, Maurine Hunsaker disappeared. Maurine was 26. She was a daughter, a wife, and a mom of 3, working an evening shift at a gas station in Kearns. Around 11:05 p.m. on February 23, 1986, her husband got a call. With a deputy on the line, Maurine said she'd been robbed and kidnapped and might be let go soon. The line went dead. 2 days later, a hiker found her body near the Storm Mountain picnic area in Big Cottonwood Canyon. The medical examiner said she was killed by ligature strangulation, and her throat had also been cut. This is where the story stops being headlines and becomes a family's forever. Maurine's shift should have ended with a drive home and a goodnight kiss. Instead, her last phone call is the echo that her family has carried for nearly 40 years. Investigators followed leads that pointed toward Menzies. The night Maurine's body was found, a jailer discovered several of her ID cards in a changing room drawer at the Salt Lake County Jail. 2 teenagers reported seeing a man and a woman at Storm Mountain the morning of February 24th, along with a cream-colored car. Their descriptions and a borrowed Chevrolet traced back to Menzies through a friend. Police searching Menzies' apartment found Maurine's purse and a knife consistent with her wounds. Maurine's fingerprint was later identified in the borrowed car. When questioned, Menzies told a different story, about giving rides to a woman and to his girlfriend and dropping them off after an argument. But the physical evidence kept piling up. These details can sound cold: an ID in a drawer, a purse in an apartment, a fingerprint in a car. For a family, each piece is another hit of grief, confirming what they already fear. In February 1988, a jury found Menzies guilty of aggravated murder and aggravated kidnapping. He waived a jury for the sentencing phase on March 23, 1988. A judge sentenced him to death, and Menzies chose the firing squad. From there began a legal marathon: automatic review, direct appeal, and decades of state and federal post-conviction petitions. In 1994, Utah's High Court affirmed the conviction and sentence, recounting the abduction from the Kearns station, Maurine's urgent call, the discovery in Big Cottonwood Canyon, and the evidence tying Menzies to the crime. Over time, the fight shifted from guilt to punishment and mental state. In 2024 and 2025, the defense argued that Menzies had developed dementia and could not legally be executed. After long hearings with medical experts, 3rd District Judge Matthew Bates ruled on June 6, 2025, that while Menzies does have dementia, he still understands why he is being punished and is legally competent for execution. The defense appealed that decision. On July 9, 2025, the court signed a death warrant, setting the execution for September 5, 2025. Utah's Department of Corrections said they would be ready to carry out a firing squad execution at the Utah State Correctional Facility. The protocol calls for 5 rifles aimed at a target on the chest. 1 gun fires a blank so no one knows who fired the fatal shot. Utah uses this method only in rare cases. However anyone feels about that method, the clock keeps moving. Families on both sides live by court deadlines and news alerts. Every update is its own kind of storm. As the date drew closer, Menzies' lawyers asked for clemency, asking the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole to change the sentence to life without parole, pointing to his age, his health, and reported good behavior in prison. On August 19, 2025, the board denied commutation. That decision closed off one of the last routes before the warrant date. Clemency hearings are raw. One side talks about decline in mercy. The other side remembers a phone call that ended mid-sentence, birthdays missed, chairs that stayed empty. There isn't a speech that makes that balance feel neat or fair. Even after the board's decision, the legal fight went on. On August 21, 2025, Menzies' attorneys asked the Utah Supreme Court to pause the execution and order another competency review, saying his condition had quickly gotten worse. The state pointed back to the June ruling and earlier expert opinions. As of now, the High Court has the case. The warrant stays active unless the justices say otherwise. If you've ever waited on a decision that could change everything, you know that silence. It's loud. To understand why prosecutors sought death in 1988 and why Utah is still ready to carry it out in 2025, you have to look at the full arc. When Maurine disappeared, Menzies was not at the start of a criminal record. He had serious prior crimes, an escape, and new arrests after parole. Defense teams talk about trauma and mental illness. Prosecutors talk about repeated violence and chances that didn't lead to change. Both things can be true at the same time. But at trial, the question was simple. Did the state prove that Menzies kidnapped and murdered Maurine Hunsaker? The jury said yes. Every appeals court that reviewed the record left that verdict in place. Still, centering the defendant can never mean forgetting the person he harmed. Maurine's life mattered long before it became evidence. She was a young mother and a wife to Jim. She went to work. She called home. She should have come back. That last call, her voice tight and afraid, has followed her family through decades of milestones. When the Hunsakers spoke to the parole board in August, they talked about time, how it stretches and then snaps back to 1986 with each hearing, how there's a chair that never filled again. They weren't making legal arguments. They were naming the cost. Menzies' final days are narrow and controlled. Limited visits, monitored calls, a last meal within policy, a small list of allowed items in a cell. After 37 years of litigation, the road is down to 2 exits, a stay that resets the calendar or an execution that ends it. Corrections officials say they are ready to carry out the protocol if the courts allow it. I'm not here to watch the end of a life. I'm here because a woman didn't come home from work and because the state says this sentence is still the answer the law gives in the hardest cases. It's fair to ask what an execution does so long after the crime. Supporters say it's the state's sober response to a brutal act. Justice shaped by choices, not by the passage of years. Critics say age and illness change the meaning of punishment and that decades on death row are a penalty of their own. Wherever you stand, the law in Utah allows a death sentence here, and the courts have kept this one in place. My channel won't tell you what to feel. I will ask you not to lose the name that can get buried under talk of methods and warrants. Maurine. If the execution goes forward, the scene will be stark. 5 rifle ports, 4 live rounds and 1 blank, a doctor's pronouncement, and 2 families holding their breath. For the state, the story ends in that room. For the families, it keeps going. What do we do with this? We take in the full picture, the defendant's past and the victim's life. We avoid simple heroes and villains. We show empathy for a family that carried grief into middle age. And we pay attention when the system uses its most serious power. For Ralph Menzies, the record shows decades of crime, a brutal act in 1986, a lawful conviction in 1988, and a 2025 ruling that he remains competent for execution despite dementia. For Marine Hunsaker, the record shows a life interrupted, a last call home, and a family that never stopped speaking her name. If you've lost someone to violence, I am so sorry. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it so Maurine's name is heard, and subscribe for more true crime cases. Drop a thoughtful comment about what justice means to you. Stay safe, take care of each other,